The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.
Spoiler alert, it's another episode of The Unlikely Innovators. Steve, how are you?
I'm getting a real charge from our upcoming guest. Of course, we have Kyle Haapala, who's a lead designer at Spoiler Alert, a Boston-based startup.
Hence my pun there. I guess it's not a pun. It's more of a
dad joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it was. I had a lot of fun talking to Kyle about his work as a product designer. Product design is something that I think has come up a few times in our podcasts, but it's again great to see someone who has that local origin story really go to move on to big things with exciting companies. So it was great to have Kyle on.
Yeah, no, again, because it's funny. Like we had. We alluded to the fact that he's now the second, graphic design grad from Cambrian that we've had on the show. But in truth, like I knew that Kyle had gone through the program at Cambrian back in the day, but like what really piqued my interest to have him on was Spoiler. I came across that on LinkedIn and I thought that's a really interesting company. Obviously, we talked about in the episode where it's again, trying to get food out of those landfills to help companies, save some money and get that product and inventory, into the hands of people who could use it before it has to get shipped off on trucks to obviously go and rot. So again, I think that's cool. But again, the fact that, you can kind of have a Cambrian graphic design grad here and kind of talk about like how they're doing things like all over the globe. Again, I think that's really great as well. And again, I think kind of speaks to the unlikely innovation that can happen, when you go to a program at Cambrian College. You never know where you'll end up, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it always gives us a chance to shout out Ron Beltrami, which is something we like to do. Also, Sean Grant, though, who's the coordinator of the program now, and others who contribute to delivering that program. But anyways, you'll hear more about that as we now talk to Kyle Haapala. All right, we're now back with Kyle Haapala. Kyle is a father, product designer, and community builder whose work on products ranging from wellness to mining. Currently, he's a lead product designer at a Boston-based startup, Spoiler Alert, with a team of folks working to reduce waste by helping food and CPG companies sell excess and short-dated inventory. Off the clock, Kyle has worked to bring together the local tech and design community by founding Charged, a Sudbury-based non-for-profit that brings in expert speakers and instructors. And we're so happy to have Kyle. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's so interesting because, you're in Sudbury right now. We're in Sudbury. You're the second graphic design grad from Cambrian College we've had on the show. It's so interesting always to see, how far students from that program have gone. Did you always see yourself in that field even before you took the program at Cambrian?
Not really. Before the program, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I even had aspirations of being a police officer at one point, probably because I was in martial arts for a lot of years. And it was like, maybe I should get into being a police officer. How am I going to make use of these skills, which was kind of a silly sort of rationalization. But as a kid, I've always drawn. So been a little bit into art, and it seemed like a way to be able to use those skills in a way where I can make money, which is sometimes hard with art, as everybody knows. But I didn't really know what I was getting into with graphic design. I had a rough idea of what it was. I did a little bit of research. It was intriguing, and so I went for it, and it turned out to be the right choice.
Yeah, I was going to say that Steve and I have brought this up several times over the show that like I used to draw a lot when I was a kid too, but I didn't realize that graphic design would have even been an option. Again, when I was in high school, it wasn't really talked about as a potential career path, I think still because of the stigmas that we still, I think, encounter with college education versus university-based education. So like I'd never even considered it. And then now having worked at Cambrian for the last 6 years and worked with the graphic design folks, it's like, man, if I had a do-over, like that would be my do-over, because again, it's really cool work. And I think, again, working with the students here and then seeing how far the grads go. Again, we had Frank Bach on, and he's in LA working for Headspace. You're in Sudbury, but you're working for Spoiler Alert in Boston. So again, you go to a graphic design program in Sudbury, and it's really kind of the sky's the limit as to where you can go.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Frank. I listened to a part of the interview with him a while back when you guys did it. I didn't finish it, and then last night I listened to it a bit more. And it's interesting to see, because when Frank was transitioning into product design, I had just moved to Boston, working at a startup there. And so I was talking to him a lot about like the transition from graphic design and product design. And now he's out in LA working at Headspace, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to ask you this just because as a graphic design alum from Cambrian, and Ron Beltrami obviously would have been a professor that would have taught you while you were there. He did our podcast art. So I obviously want to give Ron a shout out, but to also ask you, like, how did Ron kind of shape, your graphic design journey?
I think what's great about Ron is his bluntness and just the sort of logic that he brings to the table. It's very easy as a graphic designer student, and even like a new grad, especially for folks that lean more to art than design, to sort of not think of things in design terms where, like, there's a problem you're trying to solve. How is what you're doing going to solve that problem? How is it going to appeal to a certain audience? All that sort of stuff, versus just presenting something and be like, I like this because. It's like, well, it doesn't matter what you like, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about who you're creating this thing for. And Ron really helped to hammer that home. And at the time when I went to school at Cambrian, which is quite a while ago now, the program wasn't what it was now. The program has improved so much over the years. So I don't think if Ron wasn't there at the time, I don't know that I would have made it through the program, because there was a lot of art still in the program, which is important as well, but not as a primary sort of study while you're doing graphic design.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully Ron's listening, and if not, we'll send him that clip. But Kyle, you kind of already alluded to this, and this is what I wanted to ask you next, was just kind of, obviously graphic design, there's a wide spectrum, of activities that designers undertake, from the art that you'd mentioned or more promotional type stuff versus, product design, that you do and that you alluded to, that Frank does. Can you talk about the design process and how it's different when you're kind of approaching a specific product and the usability of that product for the users?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of the reason I wanted to switch over to product design from graphic design. So the appealing thing about product design for me, especially when I started, was that things are much more measurable, or they're measured more often. So you go at a problem with a certain intent or hypothesis, or you talk to users about pain points that they have, and so then you go to the drawing board and you come up with a solution for that, and then you can present that back to the users. We just did this recently at work, and get feedback on that to really dive in and make sure you're solving the problem that's going to be useful to the people you're designing for. And then once that's out in the wild, like on production, people using it, you have the opportunity to dig into analytics and to see if the thing that you built is actually solving the problem you were solving for, if it's useful. And then you can gather that information, go back and iterate on it, and constantly evolve the thing that you're working on. And with graphic design, obviously, like when you're doing advertising campaigns and that sort of thing with a big agency, presumably you're going to measure revenue before and after, all that sort of stuff, and get those results. And it's very appealing with graphic design because you get to create this physical thing a lot of the time, and you get to see it. Like, you design a billboard, you drive by, it's it's kind of cool. But once it's out there, it's out there. It's not like you can go make a few tweaks and then and then relaunch it or put it out again. So it's kind of like, once it's out there, it's out there. Like, you could make changes for, say, a subsequent campaign based on learnings, but the thing that's out there that's it. Mm-hmm. You did the thing, right? And so I really enjoy the iterative process of product design.
And Kyle, would you say that all product designers are graphic designers, or are there other fields that feed into that space?
No, they're not. I think it's a great asset to have a background in graphic design when you get into product design, but there are certainly programs now where people are learning purely about product design. People are getting their masters in product design. I think Frank has his master's in product design or something similar. So it's interesting you asked that, because I just hired somebody at work, a new designer, and a lot of the applicants had boot camps as their education. So they either were in marketing, some of them were in graphic design, some of them were in something completely different. Some people had an engineering degree, some people were programmers before, and then there's like these really intensive boot camps, which are more popular for software engineers than designers. But I think that's starting to become a thing with product design. It makes it a lot easier for people to transition as well, right? You don't have to do a whole degree all over again.
Yeah, in some ways it's especially when you're dealing with either app-based products or web-based products, it's still somewhat of a nascent field, I suppose. So it's still drawing from a number of different backgrounds, but I think that's what probably makes it good, right? And then that really quick feedback loop is you can really set aside, what's good product design and what's bad, because you get that really quick feedback, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, at least for me, my experience, when I moved to Boston to work at a startup called Miu Health at the time, I hadn't done any product design, and having the graphic design background made it a lot easier to transfer into it, because a lot of those foundational skills are transferable, right? So I went into the interview, and I had been working on my own thing with a few buddies in the wellness space, trying to work on an app called Office Athlete, that the goal was to get people who sit at a desk all day to get up and get moving. And so there was a lot of overlap with that and what the company I worked for did, but they saw obviously that, the work I had done with website design, graphic design was transferable. And so they gave me a shot, thankfully. And that's how I sort of broke into product design from graphic design.
Right. And I'll just ask one more thing that came to mind about product design. Do you see that perhaps the change in how we educate people is going to preclude this from happening, but do you see that becoming a professional sort of program like graphic design has been, with like that specialization, a multi-year program, or do you see it more as, base education in a field that's adjacent, and then those boot camps or targeted training to get the specific skills needed?
I think absolutely. I think we'll start to see that. And there are special schools that do have those programs. Like, again, Frank did his master's at Savannah, I think, in Georgia, remotely. So those programs do exist, but they're obviously not quite as popular as something like graphic design, which has been around forever, right? And some of those skills for product design, application design, that sort of thing, those are starting to be built into graphic design programs, because if you work at an agency, a lot of times they do a wide variety of work, like even some local ones like Fuel. I know they do more traditional graphic design, they do website design, but they've also built software for companies. So sometimes the expectation is that you can do it all. So
yeah. And you said that you were just hiring some people, and you are the lead product designer at Spoiler Alert. Could you talk a bit about the work that company does to help reduce food and inventory waste? It just seemed like such an interesting company in lieu of the sort of supply chain challenges we're faced with. So it seems like a really apropos subject to talk about.
Yeah, so essentially what we do is we provide a service that allows food companies and CPG product to be sold through our system to secondary customers or buyers. So think like grocery outlet in the United States, they sell product that is short dated, so it doesn't have quite as much expiry on it, because big chains won't purchase that because it's too close to the expiration date or the best by date. And so we have customers like Kraft Heinz, Campbell's, Danone, and they sell their product through our system to these buyers to help reduce the waste, because a lot of times if this product isn't being sold, sometimes it's donated. We also have a donation platform as well, but a lot of times it just ends up in landfill, right? and like millions and millions of pounds of food just go to landfill. That's perfectly good food. There's no reason that it should be thrown out, but there are, rules about how that food needs to be treated in grocery stores and whatnot. So
Yeah, so in view of that, I have so many more questions, but it's really there's a sort of cliche, it's become cliche now, but triple bottom line companies. So the social good, the environmental good, and also obviously the financial good. But this company seems to fulfill some of those, right? Because you're obviously saving the companies money, because you're allowing them to sell products more readily and for longer periods than before. But it's also keeping things out of landfill, right?
right, it definitely touches on all things, and that's part of the mission of the two founders, Emily and Ricky, was reduce waste, help the environmental crisis that's happening right now, but also improve the bottom line of these companies that otherwise would be losing revenue on this food. And so this gives the opportunity for companies to sell that product to secondary retailers.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too nuts and bolts because we'll move on from your work at Spoiler Alert, but what you have a couple different user groups that you're designing for then when you do product design, right? Who's the main sort of personas that you keep in mind as users for this?
So I think what a lot of people might assume, and rightly so, is that with our product, like the buyers, we do consider them users. We have a buyer team that works with our buyers, but they don't interact with our platform. Only the suppliers do. So the suppliers are the ones that are paying us, and they are our main users. Buyers are very used to using spreadsheets for this type of thing. And so the way we do things allows them to maintain their existing processes that they enjoy and that work for them. And so at the end of the day, like when they get offers from the system, it shows up to them through an email with a spreadsheet attached, and then they do their thing in the spreadsheet, decide what they want to do, how much they want to pay, and then they just email that back, and it gets ingested into our system, and then the suppliers see those offers from those buyers. So really, it's suppliers are our only user. There are differences in them. Some of them are more data savvy than others. For example, we have a customer that's very data savvy, and so they receive a bunch of custom reports from us so that they can dig into their data, see what's selling, why certain things aren't selling, and make adjustments and go from there. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I'm always fascinated by how you have to create a product that doesn't disrupt the sort of existing people that would be using another platform or another system before you come in. And I think that's what you've sort of done with how it bolts on.
And we've noticed too that with through speaking with buyers, that some of the competition has a system that the buyers have to use versus just using spreadsheets and doing what they're used to. And it's been told to us that, that's a bit of a negative experience for them. So.
Well, Kyle, I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of actually talk about your role, because I think one of the interesting things, and we kind of chatted about this offline, is that you're actually, talking to us from Sudbury, where we live in Ontario, not Sudbury, Mass, which is, not that far from Boston. And, you've been working for Spoiler Alert since 2017 as a remote employee. So like you're a veteran at this remote working, right? Again, a lot of us were, all of us were basically thrust into this with the onset of the pandemic in 2020. So I guess like this is kind of like a two-part question. The first part is like, what was it like becoming a remote employee at a time when probably a lot of your friends, colleagues, and family, I would presume, were working on site and in person at different companies and organizations? And how has remote working evolved for you at all in the pandemic, because the rest of the companies now had to transition to online working?
Right. I'd say at a high level, it's gotten better. But so you mentioned that I started in 2017. So the first 3 years I was freelancing while working full time. I was at Minalytics over at Norcat. So I guess you could consider it somewhat remote, but it was on the side in the evenings.
Okay.
And then when I joined full time, it was in the heat of the pandemic. So it was in 2020, which made it a very hard decision because, at the time, a lot of people were losing their jobs, and here I am. acknowledging my privilege, obviously, that I have this offer to work full-time for a company remotely, which has always been a goal of mine. I've always wanted to work remotely from home for a company, whether it's in Sudbury or somewhere else. So I ended up making that leap, thankfully. But yeah, when I started, the rest of the team was in the office. I was the only one that was remote. And at the time, that was okay because there was such a delay, right? So everyone would be working during the day, I'd work in the evening, do a bunch of stuff, send a bunch of communication. And then the next day, while they're working in the office, I'm working in my office at my day job. So they have all this time to communicate back to me. And then by the time it's the next evening where I'm working again, I've got all the information. So communication wasn't really an issue. The issue in that context is that, you're not in it. You're not in the product day in and day out. So it makes it a lot harder to design for something or it makes it a lot harder to wrap your head around the product when you're not in it day in and day out, especially something, the product can be kind of complex. So anyways, fast forward to 2020, I accepted that role. And at the time, obviously, they weren't in the office either. They were forced out of the office because of COVID. And so they were working a lot on improving or making the company remote friendly, which a lot of times just means being super organized, over communicating. Those are the two main things, actually. Sorry, I was rambling a bit. I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. But sorry,
It's all good. We welcome the rambling on the Unlikely Innovators. It's all good.
It's pretty much all I do, Kyle.
Yeah.
I'll help you out a bit. One thing that I sort of find interesting, so you're definitely within like a leadership position there. So two things. How do you find, like you were mentioning that you're hiring some people. First, how do you manage a remote team on something that's so I guess tactile when it comes to product design? And also something else I'm wondering is how do you pick up on the corporate culture when you join a team fully remotely and never, set foot in those, I'm sure, beautiful offices that startups have in Boston? So first, just managing a team virtually, and then how do you pick up on corporate culture?
Right. So prior to hiring somebody recently, it was just me. So lead product designer doesn't necessarily mean that you have a bunch of people that work, like, I don't want to say under you, that sounds terrible, but you don't have a bunch of reports necessarily. Right. But I did manage the design across the entire company. So that means like, the website, the brand, product design, marketing, all that kind of stuff, before we had a marketing team. And so being remote, I find in this position, in my mind, it makes it a bit easier because we use tools like Slack. Everything is really highly documented. And so all the conversations that are happening or might be happening in an office behind closed doors, not because they don't want you to be in that room, but because they need to literally go to another room so they're not disturbing other people. Those conversations happen in Slack, and they're visible to the entire team or to the parts of the team that need to be aware of that information. So in that way, it makes it easier because it's just everything's out in the open. The communication's really great, and maybe I'm just fortunate to work at a company where they're big on communication and we just do things well. But in that regard, it makes it a lot easier. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I just, how do you, so hopefully you're going to get a chance to go, once this calms down a bit more, to go and sort of get the sort of touchy feelies from the rest of the team, because I think the second part of what I wanted to ask you about, working virtually is just about exactly that. How do you pick up on, there's always the inside jokes, the like, for lack of a better term, the things that that are more intangible. How do you integrate into a team like that?
That can be hard because I think with being remote, there's this again communication, but like when you have a meeting on Zoom, it's set for 30 minutes. Or an hour. You're not in a room, and like you don't have these sort of natural conversations. There's this thing where people want to make sure that the meeting is as efficient as possible. So a lot of the time you don't talk about your personal lives. So what we've done is, like, in one of our meetings on Mondays, we have a portion where we talk about our weekend so that people are like chatting about their life, and it's just not so like work, you know? But we also do stuff like, we have this app that integrates with Slack called Donut. And it's this virtual bot that sets up one-on-ones with teammates randomly. So you'll get this message in Slack. It's like, hey, set up a meeting with so-and-so, and it's 30 minutes, and you just go and you just chat about stuff. So it helps to sort of fill in that gap where you can't stand at the water cooler and have a conversation about your weekend. And when you're using tools like Slack all the time, it's hard to think that you're not just disturbing someone when you just send a DM and you're like, hey, how was your weekend? Blah, blah, blah. You know, like sometimes it feels like you're just bothering people when you're messaging them versus, you know, you're in person, you can see what they're doing at their desk. You can tell if they're like, you know, open to having a conversation, that sort of thing. So it is tougher, but there are ways to get around it for sure.
Yeah, really, that's an interesting idea with that Donut app, because obviously I think when we were in person, you know, you'd have one-on-one with your team members, but because, you know, in a given week, you might see them at different times in the hallway or in different meetings, so you might not have that one-on-one. And I found that virtually the one-on-ones have now just become like any other meeting, and you're almost like, okay, well, it's the time of the week where we meet again, and you tell me stuff, and maybe you don't have anything to say this week, but I like maybe the randomness of getting that chat in before a one-on-one, or maybe that becomes the one-on-one for the week and you don't have to have the regular scheduled one. So definitely going to think about that.
And we do have like fun channels in Slack, like pets and water cooler, and people post random stuff, and you know, we have some funny, interesting conversations there. But you mentioned going to Boston as well. So I've gone a couple times while I was freelancing, but obviously since I started full time, I haven't had the opportunity because COVID. I'm kind of hoping that I can get there this year, but we'll see. There are plans now because the company has gone completely remote first. So we've actually hired some people in California and the Midwest and stuff like that. So there are plans to, when it's safe, bring everybody together in Boston so that we can all be face to face for a while and, you know, have some fun.
That's great.
It's such a cool city. I've only been once, so I mean, take it with a grain of salt, but that was where my wife and I went for our first baby moon, I guess. We went to Boston like right at the end of the first pregnancy, and yeah, just we had a blast just kind of walking around, not doing a whole ton of crazy stuff obviously, but just really cool vibe. I'd love to get back there at some point, but it's kind of like when can you go anywhere, right? So
yeah, it's a great spot, and it's, you know, it's not a huge city. Sometimes I compare it to Ottawa in that it's big enough that it has all the interesting things that cities have, but it's also like a super walkable city, which is great. Lots of history, all that stuff.
Yeah, we had a blast just kayaking on the Charles River. We walked to a game at Fenway. So yeah, man, I got the itch again. I need to get traveling again soon. Hopefully soon.
Yeah.
But Kyle, one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, because we're all here in Sudbury, you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't also talk to you about Charged, and that was obviously you know, not for profit that you had established with the intent of bringing together, you know, local technology in the design community, you know, and kind of connecting everybody. And I'd been to a few Charged events over the years, and they're great. So what I wanted to ask you was, you know, what inspired you to do that? And, you know, how did it evolve, I guess, from that initial phase where you thought this would be a good idea to, you know, actually implementing it and seeing the turnout and having people come out and connect at these events?
Right. Yeah. So in Boston, there were just a lot of events, as you can imagine, like with any other big city, there's just more people, a bigger community. And so there's meetups, there's all kinds of stuff. And also I worked with other designers. So you sort of feel more connected to the community when you're not working as a sole designer. And then when I came back, I just, you know, I kind of missed that. That was missing from my life. And so I thought maybe, you know, I had a big network, a lot of people I met in Boston and in Canada as well. And I thought, you know, maybe I can bring some of these folks to Sudbury, or if they're already in Sudbury. But the idea was I wanted to bring people outside of Sudbury, because there's already, like, Sudbury Design Society does some stuff where they have local people speak, and I really wanted to bring out bring outside speakers in. And so at first it was, I wanted to bring in my buddy Bill from Boston, who's a game designer. He worked at Parker Brothers. He worked with me at Miu Health, really interesting, smart guy. It didn't end up working out, but at Kyle McCall, who was at NORCAT at the time, caught wind of it. So he asked me to chat. And at the time I was just thinking about having a speaker at a really small venue. And he's like, well, why don't you do workshops too? And I was like, great, but I don't have money for that. And then, so NORCAT actually pitched in every year that we've done it. And so we set it up where it was a lunchtime workshop and then a evening speaker. So we ended up having 2 speakers and then a lunchtime workshop. And that's how it sort of remained. That format just worked really, really well. It made it easier, I think, for everybody, like for the organizers. For me, it's like you can just get it all done in one day. And then for people attending, it's it's just a single day. You can take your lunch or ask your company to allow you to leave for a workshop. But yeah, and then it took off from there. We were really lucky to have people support us and sponsor us throughout the years. That was something I was really nervous about. I had never had to ask people to sponsor an event, ask people for money. But to my surprise, the community has been great, super supportive of this. We haven't struggled at all to make it happen outside of COVID, but yeah, it's been wonderful.
And
go ahead, Steve.
No, you do it, Mike.
Okay, mine will be quick. I'm sure yours you'll have a follow up, but no, I'm remembering now, Kyle, like the last one that I went to, I think was probably the last one we all went to, was with Kendall Tucker, and obviously now I make the Boston connections there because Kendall was from Boston, right? But are there plans to bring it back? If the pandemic allows for these types of, because obviously I think we've, again, maybe you won't agree, but like my thought has been like virtual events obviously were a necessity at the outset, but like you have not been able to find, or at least I haven't been able to find an event where that's like kind of captured, I think, what's missing from in-person events. So to me, this seems like an event where if you're going to bring it back, it's got to be in person. Are there plans for that?
That's partly why it hasn't happened since the pandemic started. It's just none of us. I should also say that like I'm the one that initially started it, but since that first year, Chrisanne Daniel and Kyle McCall have been like integral in making the event happen. We're a team of 3. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we didn't want to do the virtual thing. I'm not a fan for a lot of reasons. But yeah, it would be nice to bring it back once it's safe. Dealing with that safety aspect of things and bringing on a large group of people together when I'm not confident that it's safe is not something that I want to do. I actually decided not a year ago, maybe close to a year ago, that I was going to take a step back from Charged. Kyle and Chrisanne are still doing that. Just with my new work, it's a lot more intense. And so it's just a lot to have that on top. Still want to be involved and help everything run smoothly. But as the sort of like leader of it, I'm going to be stepping back. But yes, there are plans to bring it back. Nothing solid, sort of just sitting and waiting to see when things become safe again.
Yeah, and Kyle, understanding that you're a busy dude, we want to thank you for taking the time and spending some time with us. It was great to chat. One thing, one thing I wanted to just leave our listeners with is more about Kyle Haapala himself, and that is when you're not doing these great things, with spoiler alert, and hopefully you don't have too many side hustles that take up your evenings anymore. What is it that you like to do in your spare time?
So I guess when the pandemic started, I started drawing again, which has been fun. What else? There was nothing to do. You're stuck at home. So that's been a thing that I've like really picked up on and started to do on the regular. I've been into martial arts my whole life. And so that's something I wanted to start doing again when the restrictions lifted. I actually did start doing that, but I ended up rupturing my Achilles on my 3rd day back. So
oh no, that's a tough one, Kyle.
Yeah, since last July, I've kind of been, on the mend. Started exercising again recently, which has been great, but still cautious for that first year after a full rupture. So Yeah, hopefully getting back into that, but mostly drawing, hanging out with my kids, my partner, and hopefully, getting away from Sudbury a few times this year. Fingers crossed
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
things are going to continue nicely.
Here, here. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of like actually good instructive things that you talked about today. Some of our listeners are students, so hopefully they can see product design as a foray, or even people that are currently working in other fields. Maybe product design is attractive to them. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and it was a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys reaching out, and it was really fun to chat.
Okay, we're back from a great conversation with Kyle Haapala. You know what I realized though, Mike? The puns that we do at the beginning of the podcast are sort of not known by anyone because they haven't listened to the episode yet.
That's true, but I did that on purpose, though. I really wanted
Yeah.
to signal that this was an episode with Kyle and about spoiler alert. So I
Yeah.
figured, it's tough to say. You take a risk sometimes because you assume that in the morning when the podcast hits your phone, maybe you look at the description, but I don't know. Maybe you just like right away. I don't care who's on this week. I just need to get my Unlikely Innovators fix, and they'll figure it out, right?
Well, but you know what? As I think about it, in comedy, that's called a callback. So it's actually a good thing. They'll realize that we were actually seeding them with information about the future when they actually hear the episode. So maybe we're actually geniuses.
I mean, I don't know how else you could interpret it other than that.
Yeah.
That could only be the only
Yeah.
outcome in your mind, right? So
again, we want to thank Kyle for coming on. I think if people are interested in product design, it was a good sort of snapshot of what you could end up doing. You could end up working at a cool tech-based startup in Boston, and you don't even have to leave the shadow of the super stack.
no, that's right. And I think the one thing I wanted to add, though, and let's brainstorm this real time with people listening to us.
Stream of consciousness.
Assuming that Chris Ann and the other Kyle McCall are listening to this, is charged. It's coming back. Maybe, Cambrian R&D, the Center for Smart Mining, I think would be a good fit to help sponsor an event like that. And maybe the Unlikely Innovators. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. We're putting it in the universe.
Could you imagine a live podcast at the Charge event?
See, that's every week you and I talk about like another great episode. We're just going to keep going week by week until they tell us to stop or until we can't get guests anymore. But I think you want to keep the podcast going until you have enough of a critical mass of following that you could do a live podcast. I think that's when we would retire, is that like we have enough of a listener base that they're willing to come out in public to see us talk to somebody. And then I think at that point we ride off into the sunset and call it a day.
Yeah, that's when we shut it down.
Okay.
Or that's when we go into syndication.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. We got
Not
big
likely.
plans. We
Not
got big
likely.
plans. Again, we can't have live podcasts probably for a while now anyway, at least with a comfortable audience. So
For sure.
until then, we'll keep bringing this to you every week, virtually and remotely, like many of our guests. And again, hope for the day that we can do an in-person pod.
Take care, everyone.
The Unlikely Innovators with Mike Commito and Steve Gravel. Presented by Cambrian R&D and the Center for Smart Mining.